I'm Bridget Gavaghan. I'm the director of the Illinois ACEs Response Collaborative. We are a program of health and medicine policy research group, a 40-year-old organization with a mission to challenge health inequities and promote social justice. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are convening today to talk about the importance of being trauma-informed and healing-centered, not 24 hours after a gunman shot and killed 19 children and 2 teachers at Robb Elementary School in Texas. We do not yet know all of the details of this latest incident of mass violence, but we do know that the community will need resources to support healing and recovery over the long haul. And we know that this is happening at a time when we are still reeling in the aftermath of the shooting in Buffalo, New York, a week and a half ago, and more locally with a mass shooting that took place in Chicago just last week. We know that there is widespread trauma associated with witnessing these tragedies. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network has developed resources to help communities navigate what they are seeing and hearing, including its impact on children. We are putting a link to their resources in the chat, and we will share them in our follow-up communications. But ultimately, what we need is policy change to address gun violence in all of its forms, and we need it now. I know that some of our speakers are going to touch on this today. I just did not want to start our program without acknowledging the reality that we are all sitting with this morning. Some things to note before we dive into the program. We invite you all, and I see some of you have already started, to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your organization, and where you're located. If you have any questions or tech issues, we ask that you use the Q&A rather than the chat function, just to make sure that we see it right away and we're able to address any challenges that you have right away. Because our agenda is really packed, we are not going to take questions live, but my colleagues at the collaborative, Madison Hammett and Myra Diaz, are going to be diligently responding to questions that come in real time. If you have questions specific to the speakers, we will collect them and share them with the speakers and be sure to follow up after the event. We are recording the session. We will share a link of the recording as well as any slides and materials and follow-up messages. As I noted, we are here to observe Illinois' 4th annual Trauma-Informed Awareness Day. For over a decade now, the collaborative has been working with partners in the state to build a movement to prevent trauma across the lifespan, to promote thriving, and to put the issues of trauma, resilience, and healing on the forefront of the equity agenda in Illinois. Trauma-Informed Awareness Day has become an annual opportunity to note our progress while recommitting to our purpose. I'd like to thank State Senator Julie Morrison and State Representative Robin Gable for sponsoring the Illinois House and Senate resolutions designating today as Trauma-Informed Awareness Day in Illinois. The resolutions are a powerful call to action. They implore state policymakers to not just become aware of the impacts of trauma, but to also implement policies and practices to prevent and address trauma and to promote healing at the individual and community levels. The resolutions also encourage policymakers to reshape the process itself to make policymaking more trauma-informed by incorporating principles such as safety, trustworthiness, collaboration, emphasizing strength-based approaches, and social justice into the policymaking process. We have been asking folks to join us in sharing your perspective on what would make a trauma-informed Illinois and what it would mean to you in your community via social media. Here's how the Illinois ACEs Response Collaborative team has responded to that. We invite you to participate in this campaign by posting to your social media today and throughout the week. Myra Diaz from the collaborative will be entering the template that we're suggesting folks use into the chat. Feel free to tweet more than one idea. We know that there are many, many solutions that we need in the state, and we want to hear from you. We want to collect that great information, and we want to be able to share out your ideas. We've already gotten some great responses to this, and if time allows, I'm going to share some of those at the end of the event. We have a great lineup of speakers. I'm so grateful are able to join us and share their vision, their ideas, and their commitments for making Illinois more resilient and healing centered. We're going to begin the morning with welcome remarks from State Senator Julie Morrison, followed by a recorded message from Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton. We will then transition to our leadership panel, This is a group of champions who are working at the state level on policies, programs, and practices that are designed to prevent trauma, promote healing, and build resilience. We will close the session with some next steps and some opportunities for staying involved. And now it is my distinct honor to introduce State Senator Julie Morrison. She has served as state senator for the 29th district since 2012, where she has focused on legislation to protect children, the rights of people with developmental disabilities, and issues involving ethics and good government. So much alignment with the work that she's doing with what we're going to be talking about today. So with that, allow me to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to the senator.
Thank you, Bridget, and good morning, everybody. A special thank you to the Collaborative and to the Health and Medicine Policy Research Group for bringing together hundreds of us this morning. I believe there were over 600 people that have registered for this, so it is really a pleasure to be here with so many of you who share this same concern. It was an honor to be the Senate sponsor for this resolution, setting aside a day in Illinois for awareness of this important issue. We see it all around us, but we didn't know what it was, and we didn't know how it started or how to help. Violence and depression and isolation, the inability to form and maintain healthy relationships, hurting others, hurting ourselves, addiction. It is silent, but it also screams. And it is so confounding to the victim. Why am I like this? It's only through the work of the people who are on this call this morning and elsewhere. It is only through your collaboration and your research that we are here today and have a greater understanding of trauma and can begin to inform others and begin the healing process for those who are afflicted. I think a child who experiences multiple adverse childhood experiences is not so different than a tree that a fierce storm passes over. It is shaken, it is pulled, the branches can be torn off, bark and leaves sheared from it. It can even be uprooted in some cases. This tree will never be the same, but it can recover. It can heal. It can regrow. It can become resilient, and it can reset its new roots in a new direction. So this morning, we're going to spend some time together deliberately looking at trauma, its causes, its forms, its pain, its damage, and the prospects for healing. Addressing those elements of trauma will, I believe, guide us to a greater understanding, not just of those individuals, but of our communities and of our society. Intervening will change the course for many, but it's really up to us to bring the awareness of trauma and its collateral damage, which can last a lifetime, to those around us, to educate, to empathize, to understand, and to begin to unknot the damage that trauma inflicts. I'm really honored to be a part of this morning and to lead things off. And I also recognize it is likely that just about everyone else on this call has much more expertise on this issue than I do. But I want to give you just a little advice as we talk about policy development and change. My advice is to keep in mind that in order to successfully address the problems through better policies and investments, we have to win over the people that don't know about this topic, who aren't immersed in the data and the research as you are. We need to remember to tell the stories that can and will win over the hearts and minds of those decision makers as they deal with policy and investment decisions. As you gather data, you also need to make sure that you are bringing the emotional connection with people that will compel them to act and make better policy decisions and better outcomes. Together, let's do this. I'm so grateful to be with you this morning. Look forward to the panel and wish you all a good day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Morrison. Couldn't agree with you more that our stories are so important to share. And we can get caught up in the policy details, but if we lose sight of the stories, our policy will not match our goals. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you again for making Trauma-Informed Awareness Day possible. With that, at this moment, we're gonna share a video that the Lieutenant Governor provided for us in advance. She recorded it for us last week. The Lieutenant Governor is a dedicated partner in this work with a strong personal and professional commitment to being a leader on creating a trauma-informed healing center in Illinois. And while she couldn't be here in person today, we are glad that she is here in spirit, and we are pleased to share her message with you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, and I use she, her pronouns. Thank you, Senator Morrison, for that warm introduction and for your continued efforts to bring healing and care into policymaking. I also want to thank the Illinois ACEs Collaborative, all the members and organizations of the Illinois Trauma-Informed Ad Hoc Working Group, and everyone joining us for recognizing that we can create strong, resilient communities if we come to the table with empathy and the support they need. It is my honor to join you in commemorating this year's Trauma-Informed Awareness Day. On this day, during Mental Health Awareness Month and every day, we recognize that strong communities are healthy communities. And every day, we continue the work to build an Illinois where everyone can be well in mind, body, and spirit. For that to be accomplished, people need the tools to be well. And we as leaders and change makers need to be there for them from the beginning. You see, the Maasai warriors in Africa don't greet each other with a simple hello. Instead, they traditionally greet each other with, "And how are the children?" The Maasai know that if the children are well, the entire village is well. And if they are told all the children are well, then that was literally all they needed to know about the health, safety, and well-being of their entire community. You know, I oversee the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative, or JEO as we call it, housed in my office. And as we work to bring healing to Illinois' justice system, we are also asking, how are the children? And we asked the young people and their families who've been touched by our justice system, how can we help them to be well? And that's how we developed the 21st Century Illinois Transformation Model in partnership with the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice to reform facilities so children are closer to their families and in more healing environments. When we talk about trauma-informed policy, it's really about building the groundwork for a continuum of care that addresses all the aspects of life where barriers and inequities prevent people from living a whole life. And we're digging in on all fronts. From JEO's involvement in the Illinois Supreme Court's Mental Health Task Force, including our collaboration on the Illinois Mental Health Summit to improve court and community responses towards individuals with mental illness, to addressing community investment or disinvestment really, and over-incarceration through the Restore, Reinvest, and Renew grant program, to our restorative justice pilot program aimed at promoting healing and restoring the balance that is often offset between crime survivors and those that caused harm. These efforts are centered on the idea that justice is more than police, jails, and prisons. Justice is also ensuring that there are enough resources and support in every community to be safe and secure. There is still more work to be done, and we all have a role in building the groundwork that can uplift everyone. This Awareness Day is an opportunity to highlight not just the need for trauma-informed and healing-centered policies, but how we make them a reality. I look forward to all of the work that we are going to do together to create a healed Illinois, because today is just another step forward in the journey. Thank you.
We thank the Lieutenant Governor for her inspiring remarks. I'd also like to extend my thanks to the team at the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative, particularly Director Yakov Delaney and Orlando Mayorga, for their dedication and collaborative approach in taking steps to make sure that we have a cohesive response to being a trauma-informed, healing-centered state. With that, I would like to turn the program over to our leadership panel. And in doing so, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Colleen Chichetti. Colleen is likely a very familiar figure to many of us on this webinar, having spent her career identifying, implementing, and advocating for trauma-responsive policies and practices. She wears many different hats in advancing this work. She is the clinical director of the Illinois Childhood Trauma Coalition, which was founded in 2005 as a voluntary statewide collaborative of over 120 organizations that are committed to applying a trauma lens to their efforts. She is also the executive director of the Center for Childhood Resilience at Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. She's a fierce advocate for meaningful policy and systems change, and she is a close partner who was instrumental in helping design the program today. So we're so appreciative to have her here today to introduce our panelists.
Thank you very much, Bridget. It's really quite something to be here with all of you, particularly on this day when I think we can all agree that the answer to the question of how are the children is not well. I think today's a very sad day for our country and mostly for all of us around the issue that these days where the question comes up of how to have these difficult conversations with our kids and convince them that adults are protecting them and creating a protective shield is disrupted. So I'm so incredibly grateful to be able to introduce this wonderful panel that we brought together today to demonstrate how Illinois is really thinking creatively and outside the box around how to create solutions. So I'm going to just quickly introduce who everyone is and try to do it quickly so that you can hear them speak. So we're going to just introduce the panel. Starting at the top there, we have State Senator Cristina Pacione-Zayas. Cristina is an emerging leader in the space. She has come to the Senate with passion for creating healing-centered approaches. She's asked for this support of her partners through the 2021 Senate resolution, thinking about how to move Illinois from both being trauma-informed to being a healing-centered state. And she comes to the state Senate with a background as an educator and advocate for early childhood investments. It is her, I believe, who I first heard the question, how are the children, shared at events that she hosted back in her days at Erickson. So we're really grateful for her leadership and to have her here today. The second person that we have on our panel is another leader, Delrice Adams is the head of the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, which, if you don't know it, is charged with providing and stewarding grants across our state that address issues of justice and trauma. She's led multiple initiatives, including the HEALS initiative, and she was an important supporter of some of the work that we're going to hear about from ISB around creating trauma-responsive schools. So very grateful for her leadership as well. The third person that we have, or actually have two, we have a team from ISB. We have Krish Mohip and we have Cara Wiley. Krish Mohip's title is that he is the Deputy Education Officer for the Illinois State Board of Ed, and Cara Wiley is the Director of Wellness at ISB. And I am very excited about their work because they have really led efforts for ISB to really say that things that maybe folks didn't want to talk about in certain parts of our state or weren't willing to acknowledge, that they were willing to take this statewide and to build creative solutions to addressing trauma through schools and community collaboration. So they're going to talk a lot about some of the work that ISBE is leading with the Whole Child Task Force, as well as the Resilience Education to Advance Community Healing project that we are working luckily with them on. And then the final person that is on this panel this morning is Dana Weiner, who may be less familiar to everyone, but she's been working on strategy and policies and mental health. She's a psychologist by training and has been working on these issues in multiple systems for a very long time, and was recently appointed the director of the Governor's Office of Children's Behavioral Health Transformation. So she is charged with this very important business of thinking about how do we all work together to align our efforts and resources and strategies to create a sustainable model for addressing children's mental health and promoting wellness and healing for our, not just our children, but also our families, our communities, and our state. So very excited to have this group of leaders with us, and I will hand it back to you, Bridget, to help them share their wisdom and suggestions for us today.
Thank you so much, Colleen. So we asked the panelists to, share with us a little bit about why this issue is so important to them, why they came to champion this work. And then more importantly, what is their vision? What are their ideas, and what commitments do they have for advancing Illinois towards being resilience building and healing centered as a state? And so Senator Pacione-Zayas, I'd like to hand it over to you first to share your thoughts on that.
Thank you. And can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate us being in community today, especially in light of not only what happened yesterday and how tragic that is, but unfortunately, this is becoming incredibly commonplace, whether it was what happened in Buffalo at the hands of white supremacy, but also in Chicago. This happens constantly in our communities, and we cannot become desensitized to it. I come into this work as a practitioner, but also a child of the community. I am the only child of two community organizers who met at the local Boys and Girls Club. And, really this concept of, and how are the children, in many ways, my parents embodied that. It was about creating community space and making sure that young people were seen, heard, validated, and uplifted. And so it kind of inherently in the way that my parents were working at the club, and that being essentially my second home, what we learned was this concept of social responsibility, that we are each other's business. And that's kind of what I want to focus on, because that really is what propelled me into the work of being a practitioner in the field of education. Over the past 20 years, I've served in different capacities, whether that is in community-based organizations or in Chicago public schools, specifically around violence prevention. And then, of course, the past 10 years in early childhood around advocacy. But, I wanna kind of speak a little bit to, and I'll touch on the vision, but I just kind of want to think about and offer for the group for a little kind of marination here. One of the influencers in terms of where I come out of the work with healing-centered engagement is a fabulous book called Hope in Healing in Urban Education by Dr. Shawn Ginwright out of California. And one of the things that Dr. Ginwright puts out is, when we think about healing-centered engagement in the context of our state, I want us to think about, again, what we're responding to, right? We're acknowledging the impact of trauma of individuals, of interpersonal trauma, collectively at a community level, the historic and generational trauma that our communities have experienced, and translating that into what we aspire to be as a state. And once we acknowledge that, trauma exists in all corners of our state at various levels and degrees across the state, we have to be deliberate in terms of how we construct policy that either enables or prohibits healing. And when we think about and understand that individual and interpersonal healing can only go so far, because when we have institutions and systems that further perpetuate harm, knowingly or not, that is something that we have to be very deliberate about reimagining and transforming. And sometimes it can be kind of difficult to acknowledge that we may be participating in a system that is causing harm, especially if we find ourselves in positions of decision-making and power and leadership, because, you know, our intent may not be to harm, but we also have to be aware that the impact, how it lands, may be harmful. And it's okay for us to take responsibility for that. And it requires that deeper look in terms of how our actions unknowingly can be contributing to a system, a policy, or a practice that produces trauma, whether we intend for it or not. And so, you know, some of the examples I'd like to highlight in terms of the vision, you know, of course, because I've got the education background, right? I'm gonna constantly be bringing this back up. And, you know, a lot of my kind of practitioner work, you know, was, I have to give a shout out to Dr. Cicchetti, because, you know, she was our coach when I was working at Roberto Clemente Community Academy in Humboldt Park on the northwest side of Chicago, predominantly Puerto Rican high school. We were really trying to shift the culture and climate in terms of, you know, how young people were seen in that space, how they were heard in that space, and how we were accompanying them on their human journey, right? You know, in so many ways, schooling has been, and I know this is going to sound weird coming from an education person and also former board member of the State Board of Education, schooling has been very harmful for a lot of our young people. And particularly when you don't fit in the mold of white, middle class, school, able-bodied, heterosexual, you know, all of the kind of, you know, the molds that we're supposed to conform to. And so, you know, just being in a school in itself can be harmful. And then there's practices and policies that reinforce that, right? And so when we were at Clemente, you know, we were really trying to start with centering young people in our work. And where Colleen was really helpful with us was establishing care teams. And that didn't just come out of anywhere, right? We spent a couple of professional development sessions learning about brain science. Actually, you can thank Colleen for getting me into early childhood, because I was literally in this professional development, and she was going through, you know, the fundamentals of brain science. First 5 years of life, the brain is developing 90%. You know, early experiences matter, you know, trauma and resilience. And I was just like, oh my God, you know, working 16-hour days in this high school, specifically on violence prevention strategies. I was like, I'm on the wrong side of the spectrum. I need to jump on over to early childhood, because if we can change the course in the beginning, that is a very different thing. But, you know, while I was there, what I was so grateful for was to be a part of a group of folks within the school building. Some of them teachers, some of them are support staff, some of them are clinicians, some of them are community members. And this care team was responsible for when a young person was referred. You know, we did some training with our teachers. Like sometimes there's some stuff that is definitely some discipline stuff. Sometimes there's some stuff that's a little bit deeper. And so it was really about, you know, identifying what is the root cause of why this young person is presenting in this particular way or behaving in this particular way. And instead of saying what's wrong with you and you need to be punished, it's what's happened and how can we support you in processing and making some different decisions so you can be lifted up and you can, you know, pursue your goals. And in this team, we literally would make individualized care plans, kind of, you know, the social emotional version of individual education plans. And it was absolutely transformative. It was everything from, you know, okay, we need to, you know, make sure this young person has a mentor, or we might need to do a screening for trauma, and we might need to make a referral for more intensive therapy, or maybe perhaps we need to enroll this young person in anger management class. I used to actually lead one of those with the group of young women that a lot of people would, you know, label as quote unquote the bad girls. these same young women, oh my God, I have such amazing memories of us going to the Bean together. First time they had left the neighborhood, and thinking about what happened just a few weeks ago when a young person was shot and killed in a summer night. But the point is that in this space, you had educators and partners and stakeholders literally wrapping around young people and understanding that the behavior that they are presenting is not the sum of the whole of that young person. It is reflective of perhaps what they came from the night before. It is reflective perhaps of a childhood of struggle. It is reflective of all these kinds of layers, but it is not the whole definition of them, because there is absolute amazing brilliance and light and intelligence and wit. And how can we support that young person in presenting that in a way where they feel good about themselves? I mean, for me, the best feeling was whenever I would work with a group of young people and they felt like they accomplished something, it was like they were like 10 feet tall. They felt so proud. That gave me the chills. That's where I knew that was the work I needed to be a part of. And so essentially, you know, for me thinking about this, because I've been traveling to, you know, all of the schools within the district. And I was just with a school yesterday before the news broke about the shooting in Texas. And we were talking about care teams, and we were talking about healing circles. And we were also talking about power dynamics between adults and young people. And ultimately, what it boiled down to was the importance and primacy of relationships. And so, you know, for me, thinking about all of the different systems that our state is responsible for and all of the different programs and services, it's really about how do we act as agents of connectors and agents of deepening human relationships, because that is literally the difference maker in this human journey, this life journey. And so whether you are an educator, whether you are a direct service provider, whether you are a religious leader, whether you are a parent, whether you are an orator, whether you are a legislator, the point is, how can we humanize our connections in every twist and turn? I always get a lot of constituents that, you know, they want to sit down and they want to lay out all these, you know, problems that they have and all that. And I specifically made sure I had on my team of constituent services social workers. It makes a literal difference. And sometimes my, you know, constituent service person is like, I don't know what to do for this person. And she's breaking down. And I said, I think he just wanted to be heard. I really think he did. I mean, obviously this is out of our hands, what he's bringing up to us, and we can facilitate some connections and do a follow-up and so on. But I really think he needed to be heard. And so for me, that social worker is making a difference in my legislative work, in my constituent work. Social workers and educators they literally make the world go round. The last thing I want to just kind of highlight, right? So the relationships piece and how we can, within our systems, put the primacy of relationships, because, you know, how we work as a state should not be transactional. It needs to be transformational. And that's what healing-centered engagement is really about. It is about how do we heal internally, interpersonally, and how do we clearly look at our systems and structures to ask that question: is this policy and practice facilitating healing, facilitating resilience, or is it producing additional harm and dehumanization? Right. And so the other piece, because we are a state that is diverse, because I represent a very diverse district, I think what's incredibly important in this healing-centered work is to really acknowledge the significance of having culturally and linguistically responsive practice and services. That makes a world of a difference when you can speak to someone in the language that they feel most comfortable in, when you understand the cultural references that they are talking about, when you are not centering a Eurocentric way of well-being, right? We know in our communities, there are nuances, there are complexities. We are three-dimensional individuals, and we need to acknowledge that. And so the last piece in this is that yes, we have state agencies that provide services. Yes, we have legislators' offices that provide services, but I really want to shout out the importance and significance in this healing-centered engagement work, because it's happening literally right now, are our community-based organizations and providers. These individuals are at the front lines. They have the most expertise. Why? Because they have the lived experience, because they are the closest to the problems and therefore have the best solutions in terms of how to address this work. And we as a state have the responsibility to support their capacity building, because we can't do it all. And because, again, historically, we've got some work to do in terms of our infrastructure within the state for it to be healing centered. But I'm going to stop right there, because I think there's going to a lot more in terms of everyone else on this panel in terms of what they could provide. And I'm so pleased to also be on this panel, because I have worked closely with many of these individuals, and I'm just honored that we have a shared vision and we happen to be in these positions at this moment, because we are going to make that difference.
Wow, I thank you so much, Senator. That was truly inspiring. I heard the theme of responsibility come through over and over again. Our responsibility to each other, our responsibility to ask the right questions, our responsibility to elevate and listen to people with lived experience, to support the community-based organizations that are closest to knowing what the solutions are in their communities. Truly inspiring. I'm so glad to be on this journey with you, and I'm so glad that you joined us here this morning. I'd like to turn the conversation to Director Adams with the CIJA. I know that the CIJA has developed a statewide violence prevention plan. You're investing in a range of community-based violence prevention work. There's so much happening at your agency and at the state level to focus on community-based violence prevention. And I know that you'll have a lot of wonderful things to share with us. So Director Adams, please.
Thank you, Bridget. And I do want to just acknowledge Senator Pacione-Zayas. We are sisters in this work. A lot of what she raised up are the same sentiments. I have to rewrite my remarks, right? But just a lot of phone calls and different conversations about this work. So I do tremendously thank you all for having me here for Trauma Informed Awareness Day. Who knew that the day would fall today, right? And it feels comforting, because I woke up with such a heavy heart. I didn't know how I was going to maneuver this day and try to be normal in a work environment, because that's the expectation, right? So I want to thank the Illinois ACEs Collaborative and Health and Medicine Policy Group for this very important event, and the continued work of just raising our understanding of trauma-informed work at the many intersections it shows up in our society, but most importantly, advancing healing. Healing is the antidote to violence, to social harms, and the systemically related traumas that many marginalized communities experience on a daily. So how did I come to this work? I loved that Senator Pacione-Zayas set me up. I am a social worker, a very proud, formally educated social worker. But before I even had that formal education, I remember in elementary school just listening to people and their stories and understanding where the hurt and harm was, and then just making it my cause to fix it. And so I think I was born as a social worker, but I have 25 years of experience in social service, public health, and public service administration for both nonprofits and local government agencies. And before I even got into formalized training, I always knew there was some backstory. I always understood that people behaved in a way that their experiences kind of connotated or dictated for them. I didn't know the word trauma. I just knew that a lot of time what we saw in violence or arguments or some of the antisocial behaviors was a response to a past experience. And as I began to learn and develop and understand what trauma-informed care was and became a certified trauma trainer as well as a circle keeper, I truly understood the impact that exposure to violence and adverse experiences have. And I truly understood that trauma was a symptom of systemic poverty, racism, and all of those experiences bottled up. But we were not addressing that. As a social worker, as a community advocate, as a social justice champion, we were not truly focusing on trauma and dissecting the root causes of many of our social ills. Understanding and learning about restorative justice, as well as the school to prison pipeline work, led me to deeply understand the cost that we as a society pay for not leaning in and raising the impact of trauma and adverse childhood experiencing. Not acknowledging the impact leads us to the root causes, and then trauma can begin the healing process. Healing is a word that we don't often hear. People do not talk about healing in violence prevention. Healing, again, is the only way to acknowledge all of the historical harm that has happened to marginalized communities, and that starts to happen today with some of the policies, practices that we have that, again, as many of you raised up today and will continue to raise up, continue to harm our communities. I was very involved in the Chicago Department of Public Health when I was a staff person there. We were pushing Chicago as a trauma-informed city, and many people, very similar to when we were raising up that violence is a public health issue, people were confused. They were like, what does that mean to be a trauma-informed? Is that fuzzy work that people do? And we were able to back that up. I have to say, with the ACEs Collaborative, doing a lot of education informing with the science, and really educate people on brain development, on how trauma plays out in young people in their experience in the way that they interact with society. As I was doing restorative justice work, I remember vividly when the red line was being worked on, we had to take the bus to the green line, and it would always be this one stop where all the teenagers going to the local public school would get on the bus, and all the working adults would kind of sigh like, here we go for 3 blocks, right? But it was my kind of learning time. It was my 3 minutes of hearing young people's conversations, picking up on their experiences in some very volatile situations in communities. And I remember one young girl got on the bus and she said to her friend, the teacher better not say anything like sharp to me today or smart to me today, because I'm just not in the mood. I had to jump on my stepfather because he was jumping on my mother last night. And in that moment, the whole city paused for me. And I said, I pray this student is walking into a school that has a restorative justice climate, that has teachers that understand harm and harm reduction. If this student is not, then that student is going to be blamed for the way that she interacts and engages in her society, in her school, in her community that day, and no one is going to ask her what happened to her, why is she feeling this way today, and how can anyone be of support today? And I share that story because that is trauma in action. And as a society, we have to be able to acknowledge these things. We have to be able to be honest in conversation, honest in what we're experiencing in a world that is full of white supremacy and historical disinvestment. We have to really face these things head on and not be afraid to have those truly honest conversations. But the flip coin of that is that we have to have solutions. We have to have services, we have to have resources, we have to have a place to send people who are hurting, who have experienced these adverse things, who have experienced domestic violence or community violence. We don't oftentimes have that in place. We don't know how to help people when they come to us seeking services. So I just want to kind of shift a little bit and talk a little bit, because as executive director of ICEJA, I continue the work. I started it in community as a case manager, moved to the city where we did training to develop trauma center curriculum with our sister agencies, Department of Family Supportive Services, Chicago Housing Authority, the Office of Emergency Management. We understood the intersection and the thread necessary to have all of these different platforms and multi-sectors understand and looking at trauma through a lens of their work. And I continue that work statewide, championing alongside the Lieutenant Governor and her Office of Justice, Equity, and Opportunity, who are really truly compassionate and want to make Illinois a trauma-informed state. And we understand that's a big lift. As Lieutenant Governor stated from the Messiah Tribe, how are the children? And Colleen, you really resonated it best when she said, you know, today we can answer the children are not well. Well, in Black and Brown communities, historically, for the last 400 years, the children have not been well. And when that question has been asked in our communities, the answer has gone unattended to. No one has cared, right? And so now we're at a point where we talk about mass shootings. I would say, like, my priority as a leader across the state is one shooting is one too many. And we define a mass shooting as 4 or more. So imagine how many communities don't get the acknowledgement, don't really get the attention because only one kid got killed that night. One kid is too many, or one kid got murdered in a community. For many years, those stories have not made the media. And now we're beginning to see these stories more and more because we have a definition of mass shooting that allows the media to sensationalize the lives of people who have been shot in a more number than 4. And it's sad. It's sad as a society because we should be looking at solutions, looking at how we fall short, looking at the services that are needed in our neighborhoods when just one life is at stake. So one of my priorities across the state is prevention. As Colleen mentioned when she introduced me, ICEJA is a grant administering agency, and we also perform research analysis. We have a comprehensive statewide violence prevention plan. And in that plan, we have seen through the data that prevention dollars have dwindled across the state. And understandably, people want immediate outcomes. When we look at the violence prevention tiers, a lot of the resources and dollars go into that tertiary intervention bucket. And that's because those are interventions that address immediate incidents. They address immediate types of things that we hear on the news about, you know, a gun shooting that happened that night. Then we have maybe street outreach or intervention that goes into play. But the true, I think, way that we reduce violence is that we have to systemically, at the same time that we address the immediate, that we invest in prevention, that we don't heavily resource Band-Aid approaches and law enforcement only strategies that don't address root causes, but that we look at the systemic ecosystem of education, health, food, you know, having youth people have very viable systems that they can be attached to help their development, and that we invest in those things, and so that we could create resilient and viable communities that young people can thrive in. I often say, like, anybody on this call, and there are a lot of friends on this call that I've worked with or been engaged in panels with, and I say, we know what resilient and nonviolent communities look like. We have 77 communities in Chicago, and we lift up 15 or 16 on a given day as high risk. So we know what the other 60 communities have. We know that they have programming. I live in a Western suburb, and we don't have the level of violence, and every day I have choices for my young person to engage in. The school is well funded. There's many grocery stores for us to choose from. So we're having healthy eating. We know the formula. What we have done is disinvested. We've picked and chose where the resources would go. And then when we talk about equity and we say, how can we right this wrong and create equitable and sustainable approaches that will now reinvest in these communities, we get a lot of backlash. We say, oh no, it should be even all across the board. But for hundreds of years, it was not even. And so what equity does, it creates a level playing field, and it gives a dose based on the need. And so we do need to really pay attention to that. And as we're doing our trauma work, that we understand that it is also equity work. And I was happy to hear somebody raise that up. At the same time, families face a variety of inequities that create barriers to their healing. And the rise in violence underscores the need for urgent, comprehensive, and culturally sensitive responses to trauma. So we must use what we know in our toolkit. And for us as a state, we administer over $300 million in both state and federal funding. And we understand and prioritize the need for trauma-informed services as a consideration as we plan funding initiatives, and making sure that we elevate that, and that we're asking those questions. And in our notice of funding opportunities, we're saying, how will you address trauma? How will you do restorative and healing work? How will you make communities sustainable and resilient at the end of whatever service provisions that you provide? How will you also have impacted voices at the table making these decisions? And I'm sorry, I've set a timer for myself because I can talk a long time. And have credible messengers who are helping us shape the policies and the practices that we do. So I will land here. I do want to raise up two very important projects that the state is moving forward. It's a trauma recovery centers, and on our website, there's a lot of information about these, but they are evidence-based, culturally competent, and comprehensive centers that the model is out of hospitals. We are also looking at pilots to have more community-driven trauma recovery centers, and making sure that we're addressing the communities most impacted by violence through these models. And then another project is the Illinois Heals program, which is a multi-year initiative to address child and youth victimization. It supports, again, community-driven pilot projects that provide systems of care for children, youth, and their families who have experienced exposure to violence. So the state is moving forward with very innovative and creative programming, and also being, I would say, very responsible to make sure that we lift up trauma as a priority area in our efforts to make Illinois a trauma-informed state. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Adams. What really resonated with me for that conversation is, this is not a mystery. We know what the solutions are. We need the political will and the public will to move them forward, to address the inequities. You cannot address trauma without addressing inequities. And that doesn't mean everyone gets the same amount. It means truly rebuilding in communities that we have been neglecting for decades. Thank you so much for sharing your vision and sharing how ICJA is moving forward and how the state is moving forward on violence prevention. I'd like to shift over now to our partners at the Illinois State Board of Education, Krish, Mohip, and Cara, Wiley. We're so glad that you can join us. There's so much work happening with schools right now at the state level. So I want to turn it immediately over to you all to share with us today.
Well, thank you for that, and good morning, everyone. First, I just want to say I'm humbled to be here today, looking at panelists and the conversations that we're having. Just kind of in awe that I'm even in the space to be with you all today. I've prepared some comments for today, but due to what happened yesterday, I'm going to just change what I was going to say, and I really just want to personalize and let everyone here listening know, why I do this work and why I push so hard here at ISB for this work to be echoed around our state. Yesterday I was really reminded of the importance of leadership during these times. It's a reminder for all of us that we're all leaders in this space, regardless of where we are in our professional and personal spaces. We are leaders, and our children look to us for the support that is sorely needed. Our school systems and our communities look to us because we are all leaders in the space. Personally, trauma and SEL has played just a major role in my life and in my career. I understood and learned the devastation that trauma can play on a child. When I lost my own sister when I was just 14 years old, 2 weeks before I started high school, I had to first cremate my sister and spread her ashes. But beyond that, I experienced what it was for a child to experience trauma and not receive support from their school system. I have great parents. My parents are both highly educated. My dad's a professor. My mom was a kindergarten teacher as well. But they were in shock and they were devastated. And as much as they wanted to provide me the support I needed as a child, I didn't get it from them. And it was really dependent upon the school to step up and help me, but they didn't. And as a child, I had not found the voice I needed to advocate for myself. And I know that's a challenge that so many of our children face. I carried my experiences with me as I started my career in school leadership. As a principal, I served in inner city school on the south side of Chicago. My students were routinely subjected to trauma. Again, supports were needed for my students, who I considered my own children. And they were not easily found, right? The school district did not provide in a systemic way what I needed as a school principal to support my kids. It was up to me as that principal to bring my teachers together to support the kids. While my students benefited from the supports we put together at school, this was not the case for every child in the city and every child in that school district. And that for me was a failure of leadership, failure of adults. As a superintendent in an extremely violent city in Ohio, I had the ability to bring supports to all children in the district, implementing things like meditation. I was able to reduce exclusionary practices on a school system that was predominantly Black and brown. We created peace centers in every building. And we worked with our teachers and we built the culture and climate teams and SEL teams at every school to help train our staff on how to better support our children. But again, much like I felt like as a principal, as a superintendent, these supports were only available for the students within my own district and not the surrounding areas. There needed to be a coordinated approach to support all students in Ohio, in Illinois, in our nation, and we didn't have it. When I was asked to lead the Whole Child Task Force here at ISB and with partners around the state, I did not take that responsibility lightly. I remembered what I learned, those lessons as a principal, as a superintendent, and the loneliness I felt doing that work. This task force was an opportunity to plan a path forward to support all kids in Illinois, as well as be a model for the nation. I found a group of people who felt like I felt. It was the utmost privilege to work with this amazing group of adults who came together, and we were able to raise a collective voice and say, this is what every child in Illinois deserves, not just from their school, not just from their school district, but also their community. And as we came together, we realized that being trauma informed was just scratching the surface. What's the point of being trauma informed if you're not doing something about it? We pushed and we focused our efforts to bring forward a roadmap on how each school, each district, each community could become trauma responsive with the goal of becoming a healing center. I'm proud of the work of the Whole Child Task Force, and I stand by the recommendations that the team collectively raised. I encourage you to read our report. It's available on the ISB website. Print it out, read it, and don't just set it down, but join us in turning our words that we put on those pieces of paper into action so we can truly support all of our students, the 2 million kids that we serve in Illinois every day. Let's join together to support them. Many of the recommendations that were derived align well with the work we were already doing with ISB. Here at ISB, we took every opportunity to push the SEL work forward that came from the stimulus funding from ESSER. We put out hundreds of millions of dollars to help support SEL. And we tasked Cara Wiley, our Director of Wellness, to work with us and work with all of you to really do great things for our children. This work started before ESSER. It will continue after the stimulus funds dry up. Cara is a champion of this work, and I did not feel right talking about something she's so passionate about and something that she knows so well. I found it appropriate for her to be here today to share her work, but also be recognized for the great work and advocacy that she does on behalf of the 2 million students we serve. Cara?
Good morning, everyone. Promised myself I wasn't going to cry this morning, but I am a mom that just came from an awards assembly. And I think about the parents that woke up today that won't get to go to that awards assembly, right? Like there is no award assembly today for their children. And my heart breaks for them. And it breaks for every child that has gone through trauma that doesn't have an adult next to them, championing them, helping them work through it, connecting them with the services that they need. I have my, my own struggles with trauma. I've watched my own children, persevere. And I feel like they are blessed because I get to be in their corner. My husband and I get to be in their corner, and we get to find them the supports and the resources that they need. But there are so many kids that don't have that opportunity. And that's why today's meeting is so important, and the work that we are doing. And to listen to you, Senator, it brings me back to why I do what I do. When you talk about the collective, like, we are a community. We have a responsibility to one another to take care of each other. And I may not understand or be able to put myself in anyone else's shoes, but I can sit at the table and I can listen, and we can work through this together, and we can find solutions. I am so thankful that I work for an organization in which they found equity, social emotional learning, and mental health and trauma to be of the utmost importance. And we talk about it every day, and we infuse it in everything we do. And every program we run out of wellness, whether it be McKinney-Vento or the out of school time programs, everything we do comes back to, these are all our children, and we have a responsibility to take care of them. And we have a responsibility to take care of the adults that are around them. And without each of you and your support and your expertise and your constant advocacy and keep pushing, we wouldn't be where we are. And we're not anywhere close to where we need to be, but we're getting closer. Every day we are one day closer to helping make lives better for each and every one of us and our children. When I think about the work that's going on at ISB, and as Krish had said, this work started before the pandemic. Dr. Ayala and her leadership team saw the need and the importance for this work immediately, and they created the Department of Wellness. And they really charged us to figure out what it is that our schools need, find it, and bring it to them. And then this pandemic, it just further complicated that situation, right? It just drew more and more attention, which is both a blessing and a curse, because we were able to see just how big that problem was, just how massive of an undertaking this is. And so we right away took a look at our ESSER funds, and we worked with Colleen and her team at the center. We began partnering with IDPH on suicide initiatives. We began looking at, okay, we can't possibly have the bandwidth at the state to reach each and every district the way that it needs to be reached. So we created these social and emotional learning hubs, and we've invested in them for the next 3 years. And the goal of those hubs is to find where districts are, meet them where they are, and get them the resources and supports that they need. And honestly, some districts are looking at us and they're just saying, we're tired. Our staff is tired. Our leaders are tired. Our kids are exhausted. We know we need help. We just don't even know where to begin because we're just tired. And these hubs are able to just sit with them and listen to what it is that they need and bring that support to them. And then, as I noted with Colleen and her team at the center, we had started with our out of school time programming and doing the REACH initiative. And that was bringing those behavioral health teams, those care teams to the table with an out of school time provider, but making sure we also have a parent at the table, because that is of the utmost importance. We have to hear the students. We have to hear the parents. We have to hear the educators. And we all sit down together and they go through this trauma informed assessment, and then they create an action plan. And from that action plan, they begin to move, and we begin to see things change. And again, not happening overnight. And there's always going to be things that interrupt. There's going to be a slight obstacle here. We're going to have to veer the path that way, but it's available to them. And so every school in the state now, as a result of that initial pilot with our out of school time space, has access to the REACH initiative. And we are so excited to watch schools on board. We know it's going to be better for our students and better for our educators. And then we came in behind that with $100 million investment in community partnerships. So when we go back to that idea of the collective, Like it doesn't just end at the school doors, right? Like we all have to be there together and partners in this work. And so through that, we saw 136 applicants come through. It's all over the state for a total of like $86 million. So collectively, we're at over $170 million worth of investments in this program. And when we talk about the expansion of care teams, the need for care teams, that is what REACH is providing us. And every school district has that opportunity. And we want to expand it further out, right? When we talk about our non-public students, right? We've got to be able to reach every single student in the state. And then at the end of the day, how do we let our parents know that our schools are well trained up on this? Like, what does that look like? And so through this work, we're also doing a trauma designation pilot. What does that mean and what does that look like? And where can we illustrate that? Where can we showcase that? So parents know when they send their child to that school, those adults are sitting there ready to deal with whatever trauma that child has experienced, right? So I'm like I said, I feel incredibly blessed to work where I do because I've been able to meet all of you and we've been able to work on this and problem solve together. And I know that although things are really messed up right now, my kids are better off because of each and every one of you. And so I thank you all for your work. I thank you for your passion and dedication. And more than anything, I thank you for trying to make it just a little bit better for each and every one of us. So thank you again for allowing me to be a part of this. I apologize for my tears. It's just one of those moments. So many thanks.
Thank you, Cara. I'm not accepting apologies for your emotional response to something that we're all trying to grapple with this morning. We appreciate your passion on this, Krish, you as well. Thank you for grounding us in what this really means to real people every day. I want to share that Krish mentioned the whole child task force recommendations. I think there's something like 30 or 35 really concrete recommendations for not just what schools can do, but what health professionals can do, what different sectors, community-based organizations, social service sectors can do. We will be digging into that as a collaborative and figuring out how we can help push forward those recommendations. I think a real tragedy would be if all that thoughtful, hard work from experts in this field spent a year building some consensus for concrete change, and we didn't make sure that it happened. So thank you for bringing that to us today. I'd like to turn the conversation now to Dr. Dana Weiner. In the interest of time, I'm going to not have any preliminaries and just let you have at it.
Thanks, Bridget, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for including me in today's panel on what is unfortunately a somber Trauma Awareness Day as we think of the children and families affected by the violence in Texas and in Buffalo and elsewhere. But I am grateful to be together today with so many like-minded, dedicated people to talk about our goals and plans, but also to observe the progress we have made in promoting an awareness of trauma and trauma's impact on children and families in Illinois. I appreciated actually having the opportunity to reflect in preparation for this conversation on where we've been and where I hope we're going. So starting with where I've been and kind of how I come to this work. In the early 2000s, with my colleagues at Northwestern, some of whom may be here today, Cassie Kissel and Jean Griffin, I worked to promote an awareness of the role of trauma, the importance of assessment, to understanding underlying problems, and the value of building capacity to deliver trauma-informed interventions. As the evaluator on some of these interventions, including child-parent psychotherapy, trauma-focused CBT, SPARKS, and Target, I had the opportunity to observe firsthand the power of acknowledging the role of traumatic experiences among children and parents and the workforce, and how this acknowledgement could shift the conversation, promoting empathy and collaboration in meeting the needs of families. During that time, I also helped to generate evidence for the role that strengths and protective factors can play in ameliorating the effects of trauma on children and families. I've studied the high rate of trauma exposure among kids involved in juvenile justice and child welfare systems, but also the relationship between trauma and strengths and the risky behaviors that can place young people on vulnerable trajectories. This is a source of hope, suggesting that trauma-informed intervention can affect these trajectories by building strength and protective capacity, but it also underscores the importance of shaping, as some of you have mentioned, shaping the environments in which kids live so that adults respond by nurturing and educating and healing instead of punishing young people who've experienced trauma. In our early work, we were more limited because many of our systems didn't assess trauma exposure or strengths, but now we can say so much more about these relationships as well as the policies that can promote health and resilience. So I went on from that to provide policy guidance to numerous child welfare agency directors, at least one of whom is on the call today, in Illinois and across the country. And in this role, I have seen how challenging it is to bring trauma-informed interventions to scale, but also how powerfully these interventions resonate with families. It's essential that we find ways to infuse an awareness of the role of trauma in all of our work to improve systems that serve children and families. So this past spring, just a couple of months ago, I was appointed by Governor Pritzker to lead an effort to transform children's behavioral health in Illinois. I bring to this role an understanding of the challenges that families face, the role of trauma in causing, exacerbating, and perpetuating these problems. As many of you know and have acknowledged, we face unprecedented difficulties in meeting the behavioral health needs of children and adolescents. Prior to and during the pandemic, we've seen increases in mental health related ER visits, rates of childhood mental health concerns, violence, and suicide. And as you know, trauma is at the root of many of these problems. Trauma awareness is essential to addressing them. We have seen our system shift over time so that we now lack many of the resources that we once had at both ends of the continuum. While we can work to right-size capacity to deliver residential interventions and preventive interventions, we can't solve this problem just by building capacity. We must also reduce demand for mental health services by getting upstream of problems. And that means promoting awareness of the role of trauma among all of the people who have early touch points with children, whether that be in education, in primary care, pediatrics, or in communities. We are in a position to restore the continuum of care thoughtfully by placing a priority on prevention, and these preventive strategies must be trauma-informed. So, the Children's Behavioral Health Transformation Initiative is focused on a few sets of activities. First, I have been working to coordinate among the 6 child-serving state agencies to secure services, supports, and placements for kids with significant and complex behavioral health needs. And I can say that this has happened with the help of an unprecedented degree of interagency collaboration in the context of regular meetings on the status of individual cases and real cooperation in identifying and overcoming the barriers to meeting the needs of kids who are in crisis. It has also happened in partnership with many of you as providers and advocates and experts who bring invaluable knowledge and expertise to these efforts, and with input from individuals with lived experience who can attest firsthand to the challenges they face in just navigating these systems to seek help. So the second thing we're doing is working on a set of analytic strategies to better understand where we fall short in capacity, to understand the tangled processes for accessing care and misalignment among the laws and policies and rules that govern the delivery of mental health services to young people in Illinois. And then the third thing is where we will be engaging in planning. So at the end of the year, our team will deliver a blueprint for transformation to the governor's office to ensure that these new ideas come to fruition in ways that are experienced differently by children and families. By infusing these approaches with trauma awareness, we can be assured that we are acting on a thoughtful, well-informed, and comprehensive approach. So as you're hearing, a lot of our work is focused on the problems we observe and strategies for addressing them, but I think it's also important that we take an asset or strengths-based approach to working this problem. And this means identifying pockets of excellence, best practices, and innovation, some of which you've heard about today from ICEJA and from Illinois State Board of Education. Many of you are responsible for the improvements that we're now working to leverage. We can scale and replicate successful programs, borrow innovative strategies that have been implemented in other jurisdictions, and fortify the workforce of skilled professionals and leverage the strengths of communities to support children and families. The governor's initiative on children's behavioral health invests in the kinds of infrastructure supports that are essential for ensuring that a plan results in a changed reality for children and families. I've worked, as I've said, in systems across the country on the implementation of new initiatives and on making change in big, complicated systems. So I've seen what the common challenges are and some of the key elements for success. And these include changing policy to align incentives, leveraging technology, and building new infrastructure to streamline and support efficient access, carefully and intentionally standing up governance and oversight, like staffing these things appropriately, and developing training and communication strategies that level the playing field and ensure that all of us are aware of the new direction. So over the past year and a half, one of the collaborations I've had the pleasure to work on has been an evaluation of the REACT clinic at the University of Chicago. I don't know how many of you know about REACT. REACT stands for Recovery and Empowerment After Community Trauma. And the REACT clinic provides youth and families affected by community violence with brief, trauma-focused intervention and access to ongoing therapy. By educating families about the role of trauma, the impact it has on their bodies, their minds, and their hearts, REACT really changes the conversation. Led by Brad Stolbeck and Sonia Dinizulu, Siba Anam, the clinic has taught me so much about the importance of having difficult but essential conversations directly with families. And it's been through this project and the interaction with the many families served by the clinic that I'm again reminded of the power of acknowledging trauma for promoting healing and building strength. Our trauma awareness promotes hope that by recognizing the source of problems, we can build resilience among children and families. And I'm so looking forward to continuing to collaborate on these efforts with all of you. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Dr. Weiner. I think this transformation effort is so important for our state. You eager to see the blueprint. You talked about this idea of access to services being really important, but a constant theme throughout the day was access is important, prevention is even better. And I think that we're starting to get some alignment on that as a state. Thank you for sharing with us. I think all of our panelists for your deep passion and commitment to this work and for sharing your wisdom and vision with us today. I think I can speak for all of us when I say that we feel a tremendous sense of urgency for a statewide response to preventing and mitigating childhood trauma and its effects on health and well-being across the lifespan. And we want to see leaders from across the state consider what actions they will take between now and Trauma-Informed Awareness Day 2023. How will our state improve? When we come together on May 25th, 2023, what can we say that we were able to make happen? And I want to bring us back to last year's Trauma-Informed Awareness Day, where we released an action plan to address childhood adversity in Illinois. This plan was developed by a statewide working group over the course of a year through a rigorous consensus building process. And it was released at our event May 25th last year. And it aligns with so many of the themes and ideas and action items raised here by the speakers today. The need to continue to educate and build awareness and advocate. The need to really understand what our data is telling us and understand what our gaps in our data are. Wanting to make sure that how we approach policymaking itself is trauma informed, improving our state level coordination. And when we talk about something being trauma informed, what do we mean by that? So identifying those metrics. And so I encourage folks to download the plan and consider if there's a role that you are playing in advancing any one of these planks. It is not the Illinois ACEs Response Collaborative's plan. There's a lot of great work happening, and this is a point for us to consider as we think about how we have collective action in this work. I want to share with you that this event this morning is just the kickoff for the day. We also have a really exciting afternoon planned. Bright Promises Foundation is hosting a Trauma-Informed Awareness Day event at 1 p.m. today. I believe that we're going to drop a link to that into the chat. The event is on confronting racism, what youth have to say about racial trauma. Madison Hammett with the collaborative is going to provide a brief presentation on historical and community trauma. And then importantly, there's a youth panel of leaders from across the state, young people from across the, from across the city, who are going to share their vision for addressing trauma and really what it looks like to them to build resilience within their community. What are their ideas? What do they see happening? What are the strengths in their communities that they want to elevate? So we invite you to join us for that day, for that event. And then again, I want to just remind you to share with us via social media what your ideas are from your role or perspective. What would a trauma-informed Illinois mean to you in your community? I want to close out by sharing, we asked some of our board members to share with them in advance of this event, what it would mean to them. And some of our partners here at the organization. And so I just want to share a few of the favorites that we've collected so far. Illinois Aging Together, which is a campaign for aging equity in Illinois, says that their trauma-informed Illinois would acknowledge the life experiences, both ACEs and adverse events across the life course that create barriers to health and aging equity. They are developing a strategic plan for aging, and they want to bring together trauma-informed experts to create informed policy. Our board member, Jennifer McGowan, who is the Chief Operating Officer at the National Alliance for Mental Illness, shares that her trauma-informed Illinois is a community that acknowledges the stories and experiences of others with respect, compassion, and love. When we lead with empathy and healing, we build the foundation for strong, resilient communities. Our board chair, Steve Rothschild, who is a physician, a professor, and chair of the Department of Family Medicine at Rush University Medical Center, shares that it would mean addressing the devastation of childhood trauma would greatly benefit 25% of his adult patients who have endured adverse childhood experiences. And finally, our board member and Northwestern medicine professor, Joe Feinglass, as a researcher who has studied the long-term health impacts of ACEs, my trauma-informed Illinois means making the prevention of childhood adversity and trauma central to the state's health and social policies. I think that that's what we've all been talking about here today as well. I thank you all again for your time this morning. I thank the panelists for joining us. I feel, the passion and commitment coming through today. I feel the sense of purpose that we all share. And I am eager for us to continue to work together to make meaningful change here in Illinois, to build upon what we have as a nice foundation of policies that we know that we can further improve. Thank you all today. We will share a recording after this. We will share follow-up materials as well. Thank you for joining us. Be well and be safe the rest of the day.